Okay, dear friends. The topic which I understood, and first of all, these meetings are, a moment, let me get everything correct. Okay, this is a series of 6 meetings, and the series is dedicated in the memory of Tzvi Hershel ben Dov Berel, Zichrono Livracha. It's also sponsored by Philotab, so I want to show my appreciation for that. Okay, now the topic which was requested was the topic of understanding the redemption, which is usually called Messianism. To understand it, both from the point of view, what I'm going to start is I'm going to start biblically, but I'm going to start biblically according to Rabbi Cook. It'll be a sort of salad, if you want to put it that way. And I'm going to start actually with the book of Bereshit. Then we'll continue to see sources in the prophets. And then after that, I will try to understand the Jewish concepts of Geula and redemption from the writings of the Vilna Gaon and Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. But so what I'm going to do is the discussion this evening is going to start with a discussion of Joseph and his brothers in the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. And this is going to be for, and we'll see, it's sort of like it's a take on Joseph and his brothers based on the ideas of Rav Kook. In a book called Shmuot Raya, which was written actually by a student of his who listened to his talks on Leil Shabbat and wrote it down. And I think it's a very significant thing. Now, if you have questions in the middle, that's okay. That's Hakol Beseder. So I'm going to start off actually with the Tanakh. So instead of reading the Tanakh, because I'm going to assume that you know the stories of Joseph and Yehuda, which we just read in the last few weeks. So I'll start from there. And then after that, I'll read it in Rav Kook, the way he presents it. So Yaakov becomes the first Israelite, right? Abraham is a Hebrew, and the Hebrew nation starts with Abraham, but Abraham is not only what we call the Jewish people, because you have Ishmael, who is a child of Abraham, and he is the father of many nations, of course, and one of them is the Ishmaelites, which are the Arabs, which live together with us here in the Middle East. And there's a reason why we call it the Abrahamic Accords, because the Arabs themselves see themselves as Ishmaelites. The name Ishmael is actually used by them as the name, of course, Ibrahim, etc. So Abraham is Ishmael. Isaac also has two children from the same wife, Esav and Yaakov. But we don't consider Esav part of the Jewish people. Now, about Yitzchak, right? God said to Avraham, "Ki b'Yitzchak yikareh l'chazera," that your descendants, your seed will continue through Isaac. And when we had Esav and Yaakov, so Rivka received a prophecy. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem, she went to seek out God. Vayomer Hashem la, and God said to her, Shnei goyim b'vidnech, there are 2 nations in your womb, v'rav yavod tza'ir. But the older one will be subservient to the younger one who will be Yaakov, right? And then, of course, Rivka tells to Jacob, you have to make sure you get the benediction and not your brother. Even though that's a discussion by itself, because in my opinion, and also in the opinion of the Ger Rebbe in Sfat Emet, it's quite obvious that Yitzchak knew exactly who Esav was. So, which is an interesting indication on the relationship between Rivka and Yitzchak. It looks like Rivka, who came from a pagan household of Lavan, even though she accepted Judaism, the Abrahamic beliefs, and that's what she wanted. And when they said to her, Hal telchi ma'ish hazeh, are you going to go with this man, this servant of Abraham? She said, yeah. So obviously this was something that she wanted to marry into the family, but she always had this inferiority complex. That, who am I compared to Yitzchak, who's the son of Abraham? He's a prophet. His father's a prophet. So what am I going to tell him? That God spoke to me too? I'm like a nothing. So how can I even tell him? In my opinion, she never told Yitzchak that she received this prophecy out of embarrassment, that somebody like her could pretend to be on the level of the house of Abraham. And because of that, she didn't realize that Yitzchak knew all about it. Because if you look at the blessings that Yitzchak was going to give to Esav, the blessing, V'yiten lecha Elohim mitala shamayim mishmanei haaretz b'rov dagan v'tirosh, it's basically a physical and political blessing. It's not the same blessing that Abraham and Isaac received from God, which is the blessing of the land and the peoplehood. In fact, after Yitzchak says to Esav, Ba'achicha b'mirma v'lakachet b'choratecha, your brother came in a tricky way and took away the blessing of your birthright. And Esav says, don't you have another bracha for me? And so Yitzchak says, what am I going to give you? I already blessed him this, I blessed him that. What am I going to give you? And then he says something. And then when Rivka says, I want Yaakov to go to my father's house to find a wife, and not to find a wife in the Canaanites. So all of a sudden, Yitzchak blesses him and says, I'm giving you the blessing of Abraham. So what happened? Why couldn't he say that to Esav? Because obviously that wasn't the plan. The plan was that Yitzchak thought that Esav would be the political, physical aspect of the house of Abraham, and Jacob would be the most spiritual person. He knew that that was his plan all along. And that's why he was so surprised. Hakol kol Yaakov vayadayim yedei Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esav, which means I thought that the voice would be the voice of Jacob, and the hands, the practical, would be Esau. And all of a sudden, here's Jacob who wants both. In other words, that's the implication from this. So Yaakov is the first one who has the 12 tribes in Dinah, and he is the first one really who is the beginning of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are called Bnei Yisrael. There's a midrash in Breshit Rabbah. Midrash says when Joseph, of course, revealed himself, so the sons were very embarrassed in front of their father because they told him that Joseph was eaten by a wild animal, and assumed that Yaakov didn't want to open up a can of worms, so he just let it go. I mean, all is well that ends well, so why go back into history? The whole time it seems that Yaakov suspected Yehuda of some type of misplay or foul play here. How do I know that? From the blessings. When Yaakov blesses Yehuda, he says, Yehuda, ata yoducha achecha, your brothers will agree with you. Yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha, the children of your father will eventually bow down to you, even though they did bow down to Joseph. And then he says about Yehuda, Agur aryeh Yehuda, you are like a lion. Miteref beni alita, which could be understood one of two ways. Miteref beni alita, which means just like the lion preys on animals, you have excelled. But it's also could be miteref beni, from preying on my son, have you finally transcended yourself, which means you did teshuvah, you repented. Because it was Yehuda who said, Taraf Yosef, that Joseph was devoured by a wild animal. So he's calling Judah a lion, which is a wild animal, and he's saying you finally transcended from devouring my son, meaning Joseph. So Yaakov seems to know all about exactly what had happened. And we'll talk about that when we talk about Joseph and Judah. But under the house of Yaakov, you have the 12 sons, who, of course, Joseph becomes 2 tribes, but the 12 tribes will come out of the 12 sons. And actually, what will happen is the 12 tribes will come out of the 12 sons and from Dinah, according to the Midrash. Why is that? Because if you remember, the 12 tribes are actually 11 sons. Joseph has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which become tribes by themselves. Those are the 12 tribes, because the tribe of Levi does not own land. They have 48 cities dispersed among the rest of the people, as it says in the book of Joshua, but they don't actually own areas of land aside that. But according to the Midrash, Joseph married, well, the verses say, Osnat bat Patifera. The Midrash claims that Osnat was the daughter of Dinah. If that's true, then Dinah and Joseph have the two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, which is also interesting. So, okay, that's introduction number one. Introduction number two. Oh, by the way, who is Sam here? I see it says Sam. Okay, well, welcome. Introduction number two. In the book of Bereshit, there is a battle over the birthright, the Bechor, right from the beginning. You have a battle over the birthright. And it looks like almost consecutively, one after another, the Bechorim seem to fall from grace. Originally, in antiquity, the Bechor, the firstborn, was considered somebody who was the elect. Just like kings, the next king in line is the firstborn son of the previous king. There's no firstborn son, so then they try to figure out what to do. But if there is, and when Moses says to Pharaoh about Makat Bechorot, the final plague, it says, Mi Bechor Paro hayoshev al kiso ve'ad Bechor Ashvi, that Makat Bechorot is going to get the firstborn of Pharaoh and the firstborn of the lowest in Egypt too, because the firstborn of Pharaoh, of course, is the next king. So it's hard to see. So for instance, take Adam. He has three sons, Cain, Hevel, and then eventually Seth. So Cain is the firstborn. So he should be the elect, but Cain kills Hevel. When Cain kills Hevel, this type of crime, this fall from grace, makes him lose his position within the family. So we'll see specifically when a child does a crime which is very severe or against the father, they can lose their position as the Bechor in Sefer Bereshit. And when you see Cain kills Hevel, and then it says that Adam has a third son, Shet, Vayolid B'Tzalmo, and Shet was born in his image. Just like Adam and Eve were created in the image of God, specifically Shet was in his image, and not Cain. So this idea of falling from grace by doing something very severe, either in general or against your father, it sort of loses the position. As we continue, we come to Noach. Noach's a little bit unclear who the oldest one was. You have Shem, Cham, and Yafet. Then it says that Shem was Achi Yafet Hagadol. Rashi claims that Achi Yafet Hagadol doesn't mean that Shem was the older one, but Yafet was the older one. It's not clear from the verses. But if we're going to go according to Rashi, so we all know that the continuation was through the family of Shem. So if Rashi is correct that Yafet is the older brother, but God continues through Shem. And it's the Semites, the Semites, who are the continuation, which of course eventually becomes the Abrahamic family as well. Which is very interesting, by the way, because when you think the name Shem, which means the name, right? Shem is the name. And so Shem is the one who's interested in letters and in words and in ideas. According to the Talmud, Yafet, Noach says to Yafet, Yaft Elohim liyafet v'yishkon bo'olei Shem, which means, may God give beauty to Yafet, and may that beauty be in the tents of Shem. So the Talmud says, what does that mean? Since Yafet has children, and one of them is called Yavan, which means Greece. By the way, another one is called Ashkenaz, which eventually becomes Franco-Germany, according to the Jews who lived there. You have another one by Tugarma, which is Turkey. Eventually, the Jews call these places, probably based on the translation of Yonatan ben Uziel. And so because of that, so the Talmud says, Rabbi Gamliel actually says in a Mishnah, he says, you're allowed to translate the Torah into Greek because it's a beautiful language. And it says in the Torah, may the beauty of Yefet be in the tense of Shem. So the beauty of Yefet is the Greek language. He was trying to justify after the fact the Septuagint, the fact that the Torah was translated into Greek during the time of Ptolemy Philadelphus. The rabbis in general, aside from Rabbi Gamliel, did not seem to be too pleased about the fact that that happened. And so that translation actually fell on the wayside. We do not have a Jewish copy of the Targum HaShivim, of the Septuagint. Only the church kept it in Greek and in Latin, and therefore Jews don't rely upon the translation. But historically, it's an interesting translation. It's important, whether it's the original from the time of the 2nd century before the Common Era, or almost 3rd century before the Common Era, or whether it came later, it's still an important historical document, but Jews don't actually use it. So Shem seems to be the one who continues and not Yefet. Now I'm going to jump because we don't know who all the Bechorim were. But we know that in the family of Nachor, Abraham's grandfather, so Nachor has a son Terach, and Terach has 3 sons. The older one, named after his grandfather, like we do today, is named Nachor. Then he has another son, Abraham, another son, one moment, I'm getting a little bit mixed up. Let me get my Haran. Okay. So you have Nachor, Avram, and Haran. Nachor is the eldest. But Nachor is an idol worshiper. And Avram becomes the one who is chosen from the family of Nachor. And to Avram, God says, Lech lecha, mi'artzecha, mi'moladecha, ela aretz asher erechem. Leave your homeland, which is also interesting. You know, Israelis always like to say this is the homeland. But in Breshit, it says the homeland is Iraq. Because when Abraham left his homeland, that was Ur Kasdim, which was in Iraq. From there, he went to Syria. He went to Aram Naharaim, which is in Syria, where Laban lived. And then from there, he goes to the Promised Land. So his homeland is Iraq, but where he's going is Israel. Israel is the land of our destiny. Wherever we go, we're going to Israel, as Rabbi Nachman of Breslov used to say. Wherever I go, I'm going to Israel, because that's the destiny. That's where things happen. Where you were born, that's secondary. It's not about a natural birth. It's about the birth of the people. The people are connected to Israel, even if they weren't born there, because that's the land where everything happens. Hamid einei ki chelek Hashem amo Yaakov chevel nachlato. It says in Ha'azinu, for God's portion is his people, Jacob, and the plot of his inheritance. So it's his people and the plot of his inheritance, which is, of course, the land of Israel. So let's continue. So Avraham then is not the oldest. It seems that Nachor was the oldest. Then Avraham, of course, has Ishmael, who's the older child. And then he has Yitzchak. And God specifically says, Ki b'Yitzchak yikareh lecha zera. And then after that, Yitzchak has Yaakov and Esav. And Esav, even though they're twins, Esav is the older one. But as I said, Rivka gets a prophecy, V'rav yavot Sair. The older one will be subservient to the younger one. It'll be through Yaakov. So continuously, from the beginning of Breshit, as far as we can see, it's not the firstborn who becomes the chosen. Or in Hebrew, it's not the Bechor who is the Nivchar, right? Even though it's a Chaf and a Chet. But it's not the firstborn who is the chosen. But the thinking of antiquity was such. By the way, even in Halacha, in Sefer Dvarim, it says if a man has 2 wives, and if he loves the younger wife more than the older one, meaning the second one more than the first one, which sort of reminds us of Leah and Rachel, right? Leah and Rachel. Lo yuchal lavaker et ben ahava p'bnei hasnoah. If he loves the younger one more, the second wife more than the first wife, he cannot give the bechorah, the birthright, to the one of the second wife, because it says in Devarim. I'll read it to you right here. It's easier when we see these things inside. What am I looking at here? This is not it. Let me just open it up for you. This is from Parshat Teitzei. See if I can find it. Okay, here it is. So it's Dvarim 21:16. Dvarim 21:16. Why is it so big? I don't know. Dvarim 21:16. Okay, here it is. 21:16. Have English. Okay. Okay, let me show it to you. Here it is. Was your Ivrit, or should I put it in English? Just don't see English here, but let me try maybe another one that has it in English. This one, no. Maybe Sefaria will have it in English. Imkaf Aleph. We'll start here. Kiteitzei. Okay. Kiteitzei. Can you see that?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Oh, I thought you couldn't.
Yeah.
Where did it just go here? If a householder has two wives, one is loved and the other one is unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the unloved one. It sounds exactly like the story of Yaakov and Leah and Rachel. When he wills his property to his sons, he may not treat as the firstborn the son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. Instead, he must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot him a double portion of all he possesses, since he is the first fruit of his vigor and the birthright is his due. I think that's very clear. So Moshe here is saying in Devarim, when it comes to the laws of the birthright, it goes to the first son. What are the laws of the birthright that they're talking about? It's talking about the inheritance, that the firstborn gets a double inheritance, Pish9, according to Jewish law. So, and the sons inherit, and the first son, the oldest, gets a double portion. There's a lot to discuss about inheritance. The laws of inheritance in Yerusha and Nachalot, the Mishnah goes into a lot of details. There are a lot of takanot that had to do with inheritances. If a person wants to give it to all his other children, all he has to do is write a tzava'ah before he dies. So, and put it into, and say this tzava'ah is authorized a minute before I pass. There are discussions like that in the Talmud, for instance. But I'm just saying that the Torah law recognizes the birthright, but from a property point of view. But if we look at the book of Bereshit, it looks the exact opposite. It looks like the birthright didn't mean anything spiritually, but maybe meant something from a point of view of property, being in charge of the chamula, taking responsibility for the larger family. From a practical point of view, in that sense, halakha probably does recognize the birthright. But the book of Bereshit and the book of Bamidbar, which I'll mention in a moment, does not seem to see the Bechor as being the elect from a spiritual point of view. Now, what happens is we come to the house of Jacob, but they still see these things this way. And what you have here is a struggle between the children of Rachel and the children of Leah. Rachel was the beloved wife, but she was not the first one to be married. Leah had the children first. So Reuven sees himself as the firstborn, and therefore he's in charge of the family. And therefore, when it comes to the whole chapter with Joseph, Reuven is the first one to say, let's put him here in the pit, because his idea was to save him, which means Reuven was the first one to stand up because he considers himself the Bechor, the firstborn. On the other hand, he doesn't have the backbone and the ability to stand up to the brothers and say, okay, now this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring him home. He has to do it by tricks because he doesn't think that the brothers accept him. Joseph himself actually saw himself as the firstborn because he's the firstborn of Rachel. So it's very nice that Reuven is the firstborn of Leah, but that was trickery of Lavan. His father wanted Rachel. He worked 7 years for Rachel. The fact that this Lavan was a trickster, that doesn't mean that's not kosher. It can't be that somebody, because of trickery, there should be a firstborn from Leah. So Joseph does not see legitimacy in the fact that Reuven should be the firstborn. Now let's just continue for a moment. Reuben is the firstborn, but as I said, the firstborn can fall from grace by doing a crime against the father or a serious crime. What is the crime? Do you remember the crime of Reuven in Sefer Bereshit, which is recorded by the Torah? It says, "Vayishkav Bilha Pilegesh Aviv Vayishma Yisrael." It says that Reuven, the verses say that Reuven slept with Bilha, who was his father's, I guess, Pilegesh is like a half-wife according to the Ramban, which means she's married, but she doesn't have a ketubah. And she was the shifcha of Rachel. And after Rachel dies, so it seems that, so it says this about Reuven. The Talmud, of course, says, and Rashi brings this, that what really happened was when Rachel died, he didn't want Bilha to be in his father's tent anymore, because Rachel is one thing, but Bilha, it should be only my mother. That was his feeling. And he took the bed of Bilha out of Jacob's tent. That's what Rashi says, and the Talmud says that too. And the Torah considered that as if he slept with her. In other words, it's not his position to make decisions what happens in Jacob's tent. So in any case, though, he sinned against his father. And then when Yaakov makes the blessings to his children, so he says, Reuven b'choriata, you are the firstborn, and you are my first son, but chilalta yitzui Allah, but you desecrated my bed. Which, if we translate that into what I'm saying, he's saying, theoretically, you're my firstborn as far as the Yerusha, as far as the inheritance. But if you think that spiritually, unfortunately, what you did was really something that I cannot forget. Now, if Reuven fell from grace, then the next one will be Shimon and Levi. Now, Shimon and Levi, of course, we know what they did. And they killed the whole city of Shechem, in which they thought was justified because Shechem had kidnapped Dinah and actually did not give her back. They went to negotiate, but they did not give her back. She was held as collateral in captivity, helping to. So yeah, they said, no problem. If you just do the Brit Milah, and on the third day, you do the Brit Milah, and all the men, and then on the third day they attacked and killed everybody in Shechem and brought Dinah back. But Yaakov says, Madua achartem oti, you have embarrassed me in front of what's going on here. And he says also in the blessings at the end of his life, Shimon of Levi achi klei chamas mecherotahem, says they are like, they have the weapons of destruction. I do not want my name to be in their communities. These are not people I want to associate with, which is a very hard thing to say, and to a child at the end of his life. at the end of their life. So obviously Shimon and Levi also fell from grace, but the brothers knew this in advance. And how do we know this? Because when Reuven says, let's put Joseph into the pit, Yehuda says, no, that's not what we're going to do. Why should we kill him? No reason. We can sell him. Why does Yehuda stand up specifically? Because he's next in line. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Yehuda is the fourth son of Leah. And he, from his point of view, if Reuven is not the Bechor because he sinned, if Shimon and Levi sin, I'm the next in line. So, and the brothers accepted because when he says, let's hold on to him in the pit and then we'll sell him, they go along. Which means the brothers saw Yehuda as the representative of the tribe of Yaakov. At least the ones who came from Leah and from Zilpah, which means Leah and her servant Zilpah. They also Yehuda as the one who's going to be in. So that's point one that has to be pointed out. The next question is, and this is of course the question that Rav Kook asks in his Shmot Raya, how can it be that the tribes of Israel, Shivteya, as they're called in the book of Devarim by Moses, the divine tribes, how could they do such lowly things? How could a person plot to kill their brother? I mean, this is an embarrassment to think that these are the people that we come from. So, and how after that, even Yaakov lets it blow over. Okay, it didn't happen in the end, but even so, what exactly is going on? Rav Kook says like this. And then I'll read it inside. He says basically, the argument between Yosef and Yehuda, Yosef representing Rachel's children, which are two, and of course of Bilhah's children, and the children of Leah and Zilpah, represented by Judah. Rav Kook says Judah was the most important, but he doesn't say why. I tried to map it out by this idea of the Bechorim, of the firstborn who keep falling from grace. And by the way, in the book of Devarim, the book of Bamidbar, there's a story there right at the beginning of the book that after the Jews leave Egypt, so Hashem designates the tribe of Levi as the tribe which is chosen to serve in the temple and in the sanctuary and in the Mishkan. And when he does that, there is a ceremony that takes place where all the firstborn of the Jewish people have to be redeemed by a Levi. Why the firstborn? Because until that point, there still is a status to the firstborn. This status will continue monetarily as property, but it will not continue from this point on as being the elect of the family. But until leaving Egypt, the firstborn still meant something in the Jewish people. But as soon as the tribe of Levi was chosen, so God said, every firstborn will be now redeemed by Levi, which means Levi now took over the position of the elect of the firstborn, and they're the ones now serving God in the Beit HaMikdash. And it says that there were 273 Bechorim more than Levim. So what do you do with these other 273? So it said the other 273 had redeemed themselves on 5 silver coins, chamisha shkalim. And from that, we also have later on in Devarim, the mitzvah of the redemption of the firstborn, not only because of the Egypt story, but because all the firstborn were redeemed and given to the tribe of Levi because of the fact to show that Levi is the chosen and not the firstborn. And therefore, you give the 5 silver coins to a Kohen who is part of the tribe of Levi. But specifically, the Kohen is part of the tribe of Levi who has a specific task to play in the Beit HaMikdash. So you have this whole, I call it falling from grace of the firstborn in the book of Breshit, and only officially are the firstborn replaced by the whole tribe of Levi. So Levi becomes now the chosen tribe, the Nivchar, instead of the Bechor, instead of the firstborn. So within the house of Jacob, there's still an argument. Who is going to be the firstborn? Rav Kook claims this argument goes deeper than an argument of status. He says it has to do with an argument about what is the whole point of the house of Abraham. Which way is it going to go? Now that all the 12 sons and Dinah are on one track, and mitatosh lema, it says that the bed of Yaakov was complete because all his children went in the right way. There's a midrash that says that when Yaakov, at the end of his life, he said to his sons, "Are you all with me?" I'm paraphrasing. And then the sons answered him and they said, "Shema Yisrael," meaning listen, Jacob, Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, meaning your God is our God, and He's the only one God. So the Midrash understands that as a dublantan, that not only do we say that, but that's what the sons of Jacob said to Yaakov when he asked him at the end of his life. In other words, they're all together. However, as we know, Jews have different ideas of what does it mean to be all together. We're good at that. Now, Rav Kook says, and this can be actually justified by looking later on in history. Rav Kook says that Joseph represents the universal ideal of Judaism, of bringing Judaism to the whole world. Just like it says in Isaiah chapter 2, V'haya b'charit hayamim, in the later days, I don't actually understand as the end of days. There is no necessarily a Jewish concept that the world will end. There's a concept that the world began, but not necessarily that the world will end. That's also the position of Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim, as it says, "V'ha'aretz la'olam omedet." But so in the later days, "Vaya nachon yehar Hashem b'rosh hagoyim," which means that the mountain of God, Mount Moriah, will be stand erect in front of the nations. V'naru elav kol hagoyim, and all the nations shall come up to the mountain of God, and they shall say, "L'chu v'nalel har Hashem." Let's go to the mountain of God. El Beit Elohei Yaakov, to the house of Jacob. V'yoreinu midrachav, and let him teach us from his ways. V'nocham el chatav, and let us walk in his path. Because out of Zion shall come forth the Torah and the word of Hashem from Jerusalem. That's Yeshayahu chapter 2. And then, of course, it says they shall beat their swords into plowshares. Nation shall not live sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore. And that's repeated again in the Navi of Micha. So this is a universal concept of Judaism, which happens in later times. But Joseph thought it should happen right away. Why waste time? If these ideas are so important, if all human beings are created in the image of God, then this is what we should do. This is the goal. Just like Abraham and Sarah were bringing in converts according to the Midrash, Abraham Gierata Anashim, Vesarata Anashim, and everybody's. So that's what we should do. The Midrash says, by the way, when Joseph was the viceroy of Egypt, he demanded that all the Egyptians circumcise their sons. And not only that, but Josephus Flavius, in his book written in the 1st century, Contra ad Appionum, against Appian, who was an Egyptian, I guess, one of the first anti-Semites in our history, didn't like the Jews. So he writes there, he actually says that Joseph forced the Egyptians to circumcise their children. So is he quoting that Midrash, or is this just something he heard? The point is, he heard it already in the 1st century, that there were rabbinic point of view like that that's what Joseph did, which would be very interesting. So if it's true what Rav Kook is saying, that Joseph has this universalist concept, then it makes sense why he's telling all the Egyptians to circumcise their children. So Yehuda represents the particular. The idea of Yehuda is, let's first build up the Jewish people from the inside. It's too early. We're not ready. If we start immersing ourselves with the immersion with all the nations, there won't be any Abrahamic family anymore. There's so much more than we are. We're too young. We're just a little tribe. When the time comes and we become a people in our land and whatever, but in the meantime, this is premature. So it's a question of what is the goal? Do we go for the goal now, or do we wait over history? So this is the opinion of Rav Kook, and I can actually read it to you a little bit right now. So here I have it from right over here. Where is it? Share screen. I'll read just a bit, but the rest, because we're running out of time. Okay, this is taken from Shmot Raya, Parshat Vayeshev. Let me see if I'm on the right page. Yes, I am on the right page. I'll start a little bit from right over here to make it just slightly bigger. You'll be able to see it. Here I can make it slightly larger. This is not in English, so I'll just. Let me find it. Okay, when we look, we can see the major controversy was between Joseph and Yehuda. Yehuda said, why should we kill our brother? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelim, to the Ishmaelites. The brothers heard this, and then it says, Vayered Yehuda mi'alachav. It says in the next parsha, the Yehuda went down from his brothers. Chazal say the brothers are the ones who actually blamed Yehuda, the sale of Yosef. They realized how the father had reacted. Yaakov also paid attention specifically to the words of Yehuda, because he did not agree to send Binyamin to Egypt, even when Reuven said, you can kill my two sons if I don't bring them back. Of course, I would say if you were going to kill your two sons for something like that, I wouldn't trust you even for selling me an apple. But the point is that when Reuven says, Jacob doesn't take it seriously. When Yehuda says to him, Anochi ervenu, I will be the collateral, and if I don't bring him back, vechatati lecha kol hayamim, this will be a sin, which is forever, which means I'm willing to give up my status, newly acquired status. Then Jacob pays attention. And he's willing to send Benjamin. And as it says, Karachel ukaleva, it says in the book of Ruth, like Rachel and like Leah, both of them build the house of God. And the Midrash says that Esav will only fall in the hands of the children of Rachel. And the main child of Rachel is Yosef. As it says, Rachel gave birth to Yosef, and Yaakov says to Lavan, let me go back home. Chazal say why? Because Joseph is the antithesis, or you might say the the nemesis of Esav. And the main child of Leah is Yehuda, which I tried to explain why I think he's the main child. Because when she gave birth to Yehuda, she said, now I'm going to thank God. There's a lot to say about that, by the way, but we're running out of time. So I want to get to this thesis. And the Zohar also says, etc., that eventually all the tribes will get together, and the tribes are called Ephraim. Northern tribes of Israel are called the tribes of Ephraim, all the 10 tribes, and Ephraim is a child of Joseph, the oldest child. So it says, if the 12 tribes, which means the tribe of Ephraim, would have been together with Judah, the land of Israel would have never been destroyed. It's only because of the division that happened between the tribes that brought the enemy. And the Navi says, it says in Yeshayahu that the day will come, you will take one branch, you'll write on it Judah and his brethren, and you'll take another branch and write on it Joseph and the branch of Ephraim and all Israel, his brethren, and they will be one branch in your hand. And it also says, so God says, I will take you out from the nations, O children of Israel, and I will bring you back to the land. And one king will be over them, and that one king will be David, etc. I will have a new covenant with you, and then my temple will be among you. The temple, of course, was in the portion of Yehuda, whereas the Mishkan was in the portion Shiloh, which was in the portion of Joseph. And these are the two who are at odds with each other, the controversy. As I said, the Ad Ha'avot Nevoah B'fratut, until for the patriarchs, prophecy was something which was private, only to one person, go from generation to generation. As I said, I don't want to go over these things as I mentioned this. Yosef has said, the Kedusha of Israel is to teach everybody the right way, be involved in the nations, teach each of them the way of God. Therefore, it's the prophet Hosea says, Ephraim ba'amim hu yitbolal. Ephraim is going to be assimilated among the nations because that's what he wants. He wants to bring sanctity to the nations of the world. And Joseph says to his brothers, Samani Elohim ladon al kol Mitzrayim. God made me like a god upon of all of Egypt, which means now God is the God of Egypt because I am the second in command. I made our God the God of Egypt. Yehuda believed that the Kedusha, the sanctity of Israel, has to be separate from the nations. As it says in Bamidbar, Bilam says, Am levadad yishkon, a nation dwelling alone. Because if it starts mixing up in the nations and learning from their actions, it'll just be like the other nations. And look what happened. From Ephraim, you had Yeravam ben Nevat, who broke off from the Davidic kingdom. He basically, to Agalim, he brought these golden calves and pagan worship. One was in Beit El, one was in Dan, and this brought to assimilation. And so Yehuda thought, in his mind it was justified, that the method of Joseph of trying to bring the Abrahamic belief, all the nations, was dangerous to the existence of the Jewish people. And therefore they want to get rid of him. Shimon and Levi, who had already killed the people of Shechem, they were the first ones that said, okay, let's just kill him. We killed people in Shechem, we can do another one. Shimon and Levi were called the brothers of Dinah, who fought assimilation in Shechem against their own sister. So they said, this guy has too many dreams. By the way, what is the dream of Joseph? That all the stars in the heavens and the sun and the moon are all bowing down to him, the whole world. Meaning he's going to bring a message to the whole world, even though Jacob interprets this as his brothers, but simply meaning the sun, the moon, the stars, they're seen by the whole world, not by the Jews, not only by the Jews. Reuven was the first one who wanted to save Joseph, and therefore the Arei Miklat, shelter cities, are in his portion. Yehuda said, why should we kill our brother? Which means, if God wants, let's put it in the hands of God. If God wants that continuation of our household, according to the method of Joseph, we're not going to kill Joseph for this, because that's God's desire. So what we have to do then, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, meaning sell him to the nations. And then we'll see. If God wants him to succeed, he will succeed. If God wants us to succeed, we'll succeed. But we're not going to do it. Yadeinu lo tiebo. It's not going to be from our hands. We'll leave it up to heaven to decide. Okay? In other words, according to Rav Kook, the sale to Egypt is, we're going to sell him to the Ishmaelites. He'll bring him to Egypt. If what he's saying is true, it's going to happen anyhow. And if not, not. Now, you could argue, well, it looks like it was true. Because look what happened to Joseph. He was sold into slavery. Then right away he comes to Potiphar and he becomes the head of the household of Potiphar, who's like the head of the army, Sarah Tabachim, of Paro. And then after that, when Potiphar's wife tells all this gossip about him, he goes back into the dungeon again, and then he becomes a viceroy of Egypt when he comes out a second time. So it really looks like, if you want to put it that way, that he was correct. One moment, how I don't. So is this? So according to Rav Kook, then this is an ideological argument, and there is a fear of what Joseph is going to do. Now, we don't have a lot of time, and I'll continue this next time. But as you can see, this ideological argument of the book of Breshit has implications for Jewish history through all of the Tanakh. And I would continue and say, and this is an idea of also Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, it continues to this day, not just through all of Tanakh. And let me show you. First of all, the easy way to understand this is the tribes of Joseph represent the temporary and the tribe of Judah represents the permanent. That's the first way to look at it. For instance, the first king is for the tribe of Benjamin, who is of Shaul, who's from the children of Rachel. Right, the first king, Saul. The second king, David, is from Yehuda. So you have the temporary king and then the Davidic kingdom, which becomes the permanent kingdom. And all the kings have to be from the Davidic kingdom after that. That's the kingdom. In Kedusha and sanctity, the transient sanctity is called the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which sat in Shiloh for 400 years after it was brought into Israel. And that were the tribes of Yosef. But the permanent sanctity is the Beit HaMikdash, which does sit in the tribe of Yehuda. By the way, in order actually to reconcile, it's on the tribe of Yehuda, but there is a piece of land from Benjamin that also enters the temple and the altars on it. You know, all great cities were built, all capital cities are usually built on lines where you had animosity. Like in Canada, you had the French and the English fought. So Ottawa, the capital, is in Ontario, but very close with the border to Quebec. In the United States, you had the North and the South. So Washington was picked because it's exactly on the line between the North and the South. So also Jerusalem was exactly on the line between Benjamin and Yehuda, which means children of Leah and children of Rachel. So again, you have the sanctity, you have the kingdom, then of course you have the northern kingdom of Israel, which were the tribes of Joseph, specifically Ephraim. The capital city was in the Shomron, which was Ephraim. So Ephraim was the one who ran all the northern tribes, and this was a temporary situation because in 722 before the Common Era, they were thrown into exile. And unfortunately, only the Jews continue. We're called Jews because we're mostly from the tribe of Judah, and specifically from the southern kingdom, which was called Judea. Possibly, if we called Israel Judea, people might get it that we're indigenous to this place, Jews from Judea, yeah. But fortunately, those who made a proclamation of independence of this country understood history, and Israel is the real name, the historic name. So really, it does make sense. I mean, politically, it would have helped us if we call it Judea, but historically, the real name is Israel. So you have, and then eventually also in our Messianic hopes, you have what's called the Messiah of the house of Joseph, who is the temporary Messiah, and the eventual one was the one from the house of Yehuda. So there are implications for this for all of Jewish history too. So what I'm going to do next time is try to explain this rift, which Rav Kook calls universalism and particularism. How this rift affected the Jewish people. I already started talking about it right now. What it means, both according to Rav Kook and maybe a little bit also according to Rav Ashkenazi Manoach. And then from there, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about Messianism, which again, in Hebrew is already a misnomer, because when you say Messianism, which is really a Christian connotation to redemption, it already assumes the Messiah stands at the center as a central figure, which is not clear from a Jewish point of view. It's an assumption that maybe works in Sabbatianism, but it doesn't actually work necessarily in the general Jewish concept of what Messianism is. So there, we'll read a little bit from Maimonides. Thank you, Heather. Thank you. We'll read a little bit from Maimonides and from and then eventually from the Vilna Gaon. I'm hoping to finish all this in 6 meetings. Any questions? She'elot, questions? Okay, I hope this is okay. I hope this is in the direction of things that people were thinking.
It was great.
About.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, Adrian.
Thank
you for
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Beautiful.
Okay. Shalom, shalom. And stay tuned next week, same time, same channel.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Shavua tov.
להתראות וערב טוב. ערב טוב.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you again, Philip.
Thank you so much.
Shalom.
Bye.
ערב טוב.
Shalom.
Bye.